Hi, this is Miss Roman, and I am going to do a walkthrough of the Natural Selection Simulation Lab on the PhET website. First, you'll need to check to see if you have Java on your computer. If you don't, you'll need to download it, or you can work with a friend who has Java. You may collect data together, but each of you will need to write your own data analysis and create your own graph. When you're ready to begin, you will either hit the arrow button or you will hit the download button. You will get a warning about the file, but you can hit keep. And then the simulation will begin. You will need to hit the pause button at the bottom of the screen so that you can set up the parameters of your experiment. The purpose of this simulation is to test if a particular phenotype is an adaptation for these rabbits when there's a change in their environment. All of the bunnies begin with white fur, a short tail, and short teeth. We can add a new phenotype. They're over on the left side of the screen. We can introduce brown fur, a long tail, or long teeth as a new trait to the bunnies, and then we'll determine if they are adaptations for a change in the environment. There are two environmental factors that we can control. First is the overall environment. The rabbits can live at the equator or they can live at the Arctic. These environments will not change during the simulation. The environmental change will be the selection factor. We can either introduce wolves into the environment or we can make a change to the food source of the bunnies. Remember that evolution occurs to a population and not to an individual. So we will need to build our bunny population up before we change the environment. We'll be able to keep track of how many bunnies we have on this graph here in the middle of the screen. I will go through an example first, and then you will be able to choose your own parameters for your experiment. So I am going to run a simulation, and the hypothesis I'm going to test is that brown fur will be an adaptation at the equator if wolves move into the environment. In order to build up our bunny population, we need to give our bunny a friend, and then I'm going to add the brown fur. Notice that I'm still paused. Now that we have two bunnies, we can hit the play button, and notice the green bar at the bottom lets us know when the next generation is going to be born. And then on the graph is keeping track of how many bunnies are being born. If you look closely, you'll notice the blue line indicates the number of bunnies with brown fur, and the red line indicates all the bunnies with white fur. So I'm going to go ahead and hit pause, and you can change the scale of the graph so that you can determine the number of bunnies that you have. And remember that fitness is measured by how many bunnies live long enough to reproduce and pass their traits on to the next generation. So we're going to be able to determine if a phenotype is an adaptation by if it increases or decreases the fitness of the rabbits. I'm going to let one more set of bunnies to be born so that we have a nice big population for our change in the environment. All right, so I am going to add wolves to my population here. And notice also that I've paused so I can control the parameters. All right, so wolves move in. Let's see how many bunnies live long enough to procreate. Yikes. Oof. All right, so we pause again. Notice the numbers have gone down. These are the numbers that you're going to write down in your data table. Remember that the bunnies that live long enough to reproduce. That is going to be how we quantify the population and changes in the number of traits over generations. So these bunnies lived long enough to reproduce. They're going to have babies. Yay, they had babies. We'll pause. This number is going to go down. We don't want to write this number down because it's important to keep track of the bunnies that live long enough to have the next generation, because their traits get passed on. Not all of these bunnies' traits will be passed on. So we hit play. Oh, goodness. So how many bunnies lived to have the next generation? Okay, that's our number. These are the numbers you want to write down. And we'll let one more generation be born. So these lived long enough to have babies, and these are their babies. But these won't all live to have babies. And that's a measure of fitness. All right, these bunnies live long enough to have the next generation. And these are their children, but they don't all live to have their traits passed on to the next generation. So it is, unfortunately, the dip in the numbers that we are keeping track of, because the bunnies that live long enough to pass on their traits to the next generation are the bunnies that are going to determine if a trait is an adaptation or isn't an adaptation. The number of brown bunnies increased over time. The number of white bunnies decreased over time. So the brown fur was an adaptation. It did increase the fitness of the brown bunnies. Evolution did occur because the number of white bunnies changed and the number of brown bunnies changed. And that is evolution. You will then do your own simulation. You will need to choose different parameters. You'll collect your data. You will write your data analysis. You'll make your graph, and you will turn those in through Schoology.